Setup time. Good morning, y'all. It's setup time. I don't know. I feel like this is like far away. Bear with me, y'all. Technology is not my ministry. It is not my ministry, y'all. This technology is not my ministry. Okay? I'm not making excuses. I'm just being real that this is not it for me. And I wish that I had help on that front, but I don't. So I'm it. I'm the only one in my family that's up and ready to do this this early in the morning. And I think even if I waited until later, it just wouldn't be a thing. If my husband was doing this, you guys would be in great hands. He's actually a tech person. Welcome to my channel, you guys. My name is Natasha. I'm coming back to you with another live because I was really blessed. There's a sound. Is that hubby's computer is over there, and it sounds kind of loud. I've never really heard it this loud before. I don't know. I don't know anything about it, but hopefully that won't bother you guys too much. I'm looking a little bit different. I'm going to a wedding today, and so this is my braid set that I do so that I have like the curly style. If you follow me on Instagram, you've probably seen me wear my hair this way before. I wore my hair this in a braid out for my son's wedding, and so I wanted to do another braid out today for his best friend's wedding. So that's what I'm doing today. So I kind of have limited time, but I wanted to come on here and do this live because this is a real topic, and it's an important topic, and I think it's a topic that can set you free when you come to understand that if God is a person, he's a spirit, but he's a person. A person is an entity with a personality that you can relate to, okay? So if God is a person and he wants a relationship with us that's beyond, you do your due diligence. If he's pleased with it, he blesses you. If he's not pleased with it, you have to be punished by him, and you have this great distance between you. If God is not looking for that kind of relationship, and he's looking for an intimate relationship, a relationship that he describes like a marriage, a relationship that he describes like a parenting relationship. He's our father, we're his children. You know what I'm saying? A relationship where Jesus, thinks of us as his siblings. We're co-heirs with Christ, And so if you're gonna be in a real relationship with a person, then it's possible for you to experience all the feelings that you would experience in any relationship, including anger. And I really enjoyed my chill time this morning because I was reading about David, known as the man after God's own heart. And I was reading about a time when David was angry with God and how he handled it. And I wanted to come on here and share with you. And if this is your first time coming on my channel, I do see the comments that come up on the chat. I will address them after I finish my train of thought for what I feel like the Lord wants me to share. So go ahead and say, hey, let me know where you're watching from, and what the Lord is saying to you about this. So don't be shy about saying something in the chat just because you don't hear from me right away. I'm a lot older than than I used to be, and I just have a hard time. Oh, that's much better. I just have a hard time keeping my train of thought and going back and forth. Okay, so let me just, ooh, where's my glasses? Oh, here it is. So let me just tell you where we're coming from today. And I had a really interesting experience today because I'm doing the Bible in chronological order. And so I'm following a plan. And I've come to the part where David has been crowned king. Okay, and I've done a couple of lives already about his situation with Saul before he became king. So now Saul is dead and David is king. Okay, and the passage that the Bible in chronological order gave me to read today, the passages were 2 Samuel 5, 11 through 25, 2 Samuel 6, and I also had to read 1 Chronicles 13 through chapter 13 all the way through chapter 16. Okay, and it's interesting because both of those sections, what I've learned, what I was told to read in First Chronicles is the exact same story. Okay, is the exact same story as I was told to read in 2 Samuel. Hold up, y'all. I forgot to put the date over here. Okay. And so that happens in the Bible a lot. The same story is told in multiple different places. I think it's most marked in the Gospels, like Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John in the New Testament. A lot of Jesus's ministry is told from the point of view of these different apostles that wrote the New Testament. It's the same story told in different places, and so I find it really helpful. It's really advisable when you're reading a passage like that to read all the different versions side by side and consider all the details that are revealed, because the whole story is revealed best when you read all the different accounts. God didn't forget that he told Matthew to tell that story, and then Mark and John also told it. You know what I'm saying? He did it on purpose because a lot more of the story is revealed when you hear about it from different eyewitnesses, from their different perspectives and from their different points of view. Now, I don't know how First Chronicles differs from Samuel and how all of that works, but I do know that the way the story is laid out in 2 Samuel is a little bit different from how the story is laid out in First Chronicles. And so I started to make some assumptions about David's frame of mind because of the way, and his responses to things, because of the way the story was laid out. Okay, so I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to read you, I think I want to read you the first. Do I want to read you the First Chronicle? I don't want to read you both accounts because that's too much for the amount of time that we have. I think I want to read you, which one did I start with? I think I want to read you the 2 Samuel account because it's a little bit more concise. And then I'll tell you how it's different from the First Chronicles account and how I had to reevaluate what I was seeing. Okay? And so we're supposed to start at verse 11. So this happens, we pick up the story today, after Saul dies. David ends up in Hebron, and Judah, the tribe that he's from, rallies around him and crowns him king, but the rest of Israel isn't with him yet. In fact, Abner, the commander of Saul's army, puts his son on the throne, and that all doesn't go well. So there's a period of time when it's almost like you're dealing with two kingdoms. David is king over Judah, but not over the rest of Israel. But all of that ends up being resolved as the rest of Israel comes 7 years later to Hebron to make David king. So it's interesting what he does. He doesn't go and make them accept him as king or go and demand that they accept him as king. He knows that if he's supposed to be king, they're going to come to him, and this is a thing that God is going to do. So even after Saul's death, we see, you know, interesting approach to walking out the prophecy that the Lord had spoken over him, that he would be king over Israel instead of Saul. And it's interesting because the language that they use when the rest of Israel comes to make him king is, we're coming to make you king because we know that you're the one that the Lord really used to deliver us even in the days of Saul, and we know that God has chosen you to be king over us instead of Saul, and so now we want to make you king. You know, and when I was reading that, it begged the question, well, if y'all knew this all along, what took y'all so long? But there's a time and a season and an order and a place for the things that the Lord wants to happen to come to place. And David doesn't push that. He doesn't operate according to the way other kings of the world would operate. You know, he truly submits himself to God, and we see that everything that comes to pass for him uniquely comes to pass God's way. And some of it might make you scratch your head because that's not how we would do things, right? But I think that's the point. God is not like us. He's like, we're made to be like him, but he's not like us in our areas of weakness, okay? If that makes any sense. And so right now we pick up at the story where, okay, so now he's king of Judah. He's king of all of Israel now, okay? Where is he going to live? Now, Jerusalem was part of the promised land that Israel was supposed to conquer. But when it came time for them to conquer it, the Jebusites resisted them and gave them a strong fight. And Jerusalem it was also well defended the way it was built. And it was called a stronghold. So it was hard for them to defeat it. And the people didn't want, the Jebusites didn't want to let go of Jerusalem. Okay, and so the people just decided to live among them. But when it was time for David to become king, he wanted Jerusalem, and the Lord allowed him to take Jerusalem. And so right now we're at the place where, okay, now I'm king of all of Israel. We're moving this operation to Jerusalem. Okay, and now we're you know, he's already defeated the stronghold. Okay, Jerusalem, and it says in verse 9, I'm gonna go back a little further. It says, then David dwelt in the stronghold and called it the city of David. That's Jerusalem. And David built all around from Milo and inward. So David went on and became great, and the Lord of hosts was with him. Then Hiram, the king of Tyre, sent messengers to David, and cedar trees, and carpenters, and masons, and they built David a house. So David knew that the Lord had established him as king over Israel, and that he had exalted his kingdom for the sake of his people Israel. So David gets acknowledgement from a nearby king. You know, his kingdom is validated. Okay? And so verse 13, and David took more concubines and wives from Jerusalem after he had come from Hebron. Also more sons and daughters were born to David. And then it tells the names of his sons and daughters. So I'm going to go down to verse 17. It says, now when the Philistines heard that they had anointed David king over Israel, all the Philistines went up to search for David. And David heard of it and went down to the stronghold. The Philistines also went and deployed themselves in the valley of Rephaim. So David inquired of the Lord, saying, shall I go up against the Philistines? Will you deliver them into my hand? And the Lord said to David, go up, for I will doubtless deliver the Philistines into your hand. So David went up to Baal Perazim, and David defeated them there. And he said, the Lord has broken through my enemies before me like a breakthrough of water. Therefore he called the name of the place Baal Perazim. And they left their images there, and David and his men carried them away. Then the Philistine went up once again and deployed themselves in the valley of Rephaim. Therefore David inquired of the Lord, and he said, "You shall not go up. Circle around behind them and come upon them in front of the mulberry trees. And it shall be, when you hear the sound of the marching in the tops of the mulberry trees, then you shall advance quickly, for then the Lord will go out before you to strike the camp of the Philistines." Now, this is a different kind of lesson than what I want to talk about today. But when I was reading about this popped up to me, okay? Because the Philistines, who were sometimes David's allies, most of the time David's enemy when he was running away from Saul, now that they heard that he's king, they're coming up against him, so that he doesn't become a problem for them. They're threatened by him. But David doesn't just go out and deal with the problem. He asks God first. And it's a demonstration that he realizes that I am mighty in battle. He's proven that he's been mighty in battle all along, but he knows that his strength comes from the Lord, and the things that he's been able to do in the Lord are supernatural. Okay. Now, I didn't do lives in previous times about, David's experience in the stronghold and the different battles he was in and what his mighty men were like. I didn't do lives about all of those as I read through them. Okay. But when you read those accounts, a lot of the stuff that happened was supernatural. Like one of David's men would by himself defeat 300 men, kill 300 men by himself. Okay. One of David's men came upon a lion in a pit and killed the lion with his bare hands. Supernatural kind of stuff. Okay. And so I wanted to bring this up, even though we are talking about being angry at God and how, you go through a situation like that, how David went through that situation. I wanted to highlight here that what struck me was, when you read these kind of stories in the Bible, it's like you're reading about Spider-Man or Superman or Captain America. You know what I'm saying? Black Panther. You know what I'm saying? It's like you're reading about some kind of superhero, okay? And because we have this entertainment culture and these stories that we know to be fiction, when you read about this stuff in the Bible, you sometimes you might be wanting to question whether or not it's real. Did that really happen? You know what I'm saying? Was there really a man like Samson that was able to defeat a whole army with the jawbone of a donkey? And it can make the supernatural, when I say the supernatural, the spirit realm, the way that God moves and operates, it can make us wonder and question whether those things are real, because we have our fiction version of it. Okay. My daughter, one of my daughters, sadly, has a friend who came to the conclusion, and they're young. The friend came to the conclusion that the Bible can't be true, because these stories are in the Bible, and there's no way these stories are true because these things are fake. That's like Superman. That's like Spider-Man. I know those things aren't real. So David couldn't have had a mighty man that was able to do all of those things. Okay. But this story shows that God was really moving supernaturally like that. He was really empowering people to do superhuman, supernatural stuff like that. This is the true, these are the true superheroes. Okay. David's mighty men were the true knights of the round table, able to fight like how you see, in King Arthur. And you know what I'm saying? All the stuff we come up with in movies, all the superheroes we make in movies that have amazing fighting abilities. You know what I'm saying? That can fly, that can leap, that can do supernatural things. We made up those fictitious stories, but God is really real. And in history, God has actually empowered real people to do supernatural things like that. There were real superheroes like that in real life. Okay. And it's tragic that we're not able to see that as being true because, of our own use of our own imagination and the things that we've done with our stories. Okay. Instead, that boy should have been like, wow, superheroes are really real. There is such a thing. There is such a thing as a superhero. Wow, the Spirit of the Lord can actually come on me and I can do superhuman things. We need to get back to that. We need to get back to that. And I'm looking forward to God pouring out his Spirit on all flesh so that we can go back to that. Okay, because when you read this closely, you know, the first time God said, yeah, go out, do what you know how to do, you're going to win the battle with them. But the Philistines, even though they were defeated that first time, they didn't back down. They rallied again at the valley of Rephaim. That's verse 23. And then God asked God again, what's the battle plan? This time God tells him something different. He says, no, don't go up like you did last time. God said, circle around behind them and come upon them in front of the mulberry trees. And this is the verse you need to pay attention to. Verse 24 says, and it shall be when you hear the sound of marching on the tops of the mulberry trees. Guys, can people march on top of trees? God is literally telling David, you're going to hear an army marching on the top of trees. Who is that? What kind of army can march? Who can march on top of trees? Okay, and that's why it's important to read the account in both books, because when you read this same account in First Chronicles, you get further revelation that it's God's army that's marching on the top of the trees. Even though David and his army are not able to physically see God's army, God's army, his angelic spiritual army is literally fighting and going into battle against the Philistines with David and his army, literally, so that they'll be able to hear the noise. So God's like, no, you're not going out by yourself like you did the first time. I'm going to go out before you first. Okay? When you hear my army on the top of the trees going ahead of you, then you go out with them, and then we're going to give them the beat down together. It's supernatural, you guys. He has a supernatural encounter with God. He knows it's supernatural, and the Philistines go into battle, and they know it's a supernatural situation. Supernatural being, I don't want to use the word supernatural. They know that there are spiritual implications for what's happening in the natural. So they're in a physical battle in the natural with people that they can see, people who are like them. But they know that that's not it. That's not the only thing that will turn the tide of the battle. They know that God's a God, their little g God, their idol is coming up against God, Israel's God, in the battle also. It's a battle between their idol and Israel's idols and Israel's God. Okay, Israel knows there's a spiritual component. The Philistines know that there's a spiritual component. And it says when the Philistines end up losing, they leave their gods on the battlefield. And it's an acknowledgement that Israel's God defeated our God. Our God was useless in this battle. And it's like they turned their backs on their idol. Okay. And when I was reading this, I'm like, wow, wow, wow. Have we elevated science and our knowledge and our ability to move forward with technology to the extent that we make movies that seem real and but we know it's fake, it's fiction, and we're so puffed up in our modern advances? Have we gotten so foolish that we have forgotten what those people back then knew? We have forgotten the spirit realm. We have forgotten, that this element, that the things that we don't see are more real than the things that we do see. There's a scripture that says that, but we figure, well, since I don't see it, it's not real. But God allowed David and his men to hear. He said, that's going to be the signal. You're going to hear my army marching on the trees ahead of you. Then you're going to go. And then they're going to take the beat down, because it says, and David did so as the Lord commanded him. And he drove back the Philistines from Geba as far as Gezer. So on to chapter 6. So the way these events are laid out in 2 Samuel, you hear about this experience with the Philistines first. Okay? And then you get into the story about the ark, which is where David gets angry with God, that we're going to go into for the live right now. And so I was assessing David's frame of mind based on, he's just had this super amazing experience with God being on his side. He's pumped up. He's he thinks he's in one place with God as far as their intimacy, and God is with me, let's do this type of feeling. And then we read about the experience with how David decides, okay, I've put my house in Jerusalem. We're in Jerusalem now. We need to bring the ark where it was in Kirjath Jearim. Okay, we need to bring the ark from there to Jerusalem, because we haven't really inquired of the ark, which represents the Lord's presence. The Lord of hosts is with us, basically. We need to bring this ark to Jerusalem. And because I read the story in this order in 2 Samuel, I thought, he was in this high place with the Lord. And then this experience happened with the ark. And then we're going to talk about how it causes him to be angry with God and kind of disillusioned and confused about God. And then it would almost read, if you just read the 2 Samuel account, that he kind of went and sulked somewhere to kind of lick his wounds and deal with his anger with God. And then God did all of the work to bring him back to God. But if you look at the account, there's nothing that says that the events necessarily happened in this order. Okay? It's laid out in this order, but it could also be a situation where, sometimes when you're telling, you're telling stories to somebody, you might tell one story ahead of another story out of chronological order, but the stories stand alone. Okay, it was me that put them in that place, because when I went on to read this account in First Chronicles, the stories are not laid out in that order. The story of the ark, the story of him taking Jerusalem is told first, then the story of the ark is told, then the story of his defeat of the Philistines is told. So that's a different situation. In that situation, David's angry with the Lord, but then he still goes on to inquire of the Lord and move and allow the Lord to move mightily in his life, and deal with him on that issue of him being angry with the Lord. That's completely different. Him being angry and disillusioned didn't end his relationship with the Lord. You understand what I'm saying? And he wasn't sulking somewhere because he was angry with the Lord. He was moving forward in the Lord and still being blessed of the Lord as the Lord worked through that issue with him. Okay? So I think it's important to look at the stories in those different places so that you don't make wrong assumptions that, well, David, God gave him time to sulk, and God, and if you're angry with the Lord, you should go off and take some time. Take some time so that you could figure it out, like how we do in our natural relationships. Okay? But that's really not what David did. Okay? So maybe I should have really read this in First Chronicles instead of in Second Chronicles. But let me just read the account of the ark and why David became angry with God. So I actually like the way that part is laid out in First Chronicles better, because I feel like it gives more details than it does in 2 Samuel. So let me go there. First Chronicles 13, it says, so this is after taking Jerusalem. It says, then David consulted the captains of thousands and hundreds, and with every leader. And David said to all the assembly of Israel, if it seems good to you, and if it is of the Lord our God, let us send out to our brethren everywhere who are left in all the land of Israel, and with them to the priests and Levites who are in their cities and their common lands, that they may gather together to us. And let us bring the ark of our God back to us, for we have not inquired at it since the days of Saul. Then all the assembly said that they would do so, for the thing was right in the eyes of all the people. So David gathered all Israel together from Sheor in Egypt to as far as the entrance of Hamath to bring the ark of God from Kirjath Jearim. And David and all Israel went up to Bala to Kirjath Jearim, which belonged to Judah, to bring up from there the ark of God, the Lord, who dwells between the cherubim, where his name is proclaimed. Verse 7. So they carried the ark of God on a new cart from the house of Abinadab, and Uzzah and Ahio drove the ark. Okay? So they're moving the ark, and the sons of the people that who had been housing the ark are responsible for bringing the ark, and they're moving the ark on a cart. Remember that. Verse 8. Then David and all Israel played music before God with all their might, with singing on harps, on stringed instruments, on tambourines, on cymbals, and with trumpets. And when they came to Chidon's threshing floor, Uzzah put out his hand to hold the ark, for the oxen stumbled. So he was afraid the ark was going to fall. Verse 10. Then the anger of the Lord was aroused against Uzzah, and he struck him because he put his hand to the ark, and he died there before God. And David became angry because of the Lord's outbreak against Uzzah. Therefore that place was called Perez Uzzah to this day. David was afraid of God that day, saying, how can I bring the ark of God to me? Okay, so David earnestly wants to bring the ark to him, and he set up this beautiful operation, this beautiful procession, this beautiful worshipful parade in order to bring the ark. He even had a new cart made to put the ark on. And these sons, Uzzah and what's the other one? Ahio, the sons of Abinadab. Okay, this is a priestly family, so it's not inappropriate that the ark was in his house, in Abinadab's house, and they were handling the ark. And who knows what their relationship was with the ark during all of that time, and perhaps they didn't have the capacity to do all the things that were necessary to be done with the ark as when it was in the wilderness tabernacle. I don't know. We don't have all of the details about it. But what we come to see is something has happened between the time the ark is in the house of Abinadab and is being brought to Jerusalem like this on this cart, and how stuff used to be done back in Moses' day, when God had a specific set of instructions that he gave the sons of Aaron for what they were supposed to do with the ark, how to handle the ark. The ark was made so that these poles were strung through the ark so that the ark could be carried. And so the ark was never put on a cart. The ark was always carried. But it wasn't, and it wasn't even just carried by anyone. It was carried by the people that God designated could carry it. Okay, the sons of Kohath, okay, had the job of carrying the ark. One set of sons had the job of taking care of all the stuff that made up the frame of the tabernacle. Another set of people had the job of carrying all the furniture that was in the holy place, including the ark. I mean, God gave specific. Somebody had charge of the skins, and these people handled these things. They were responsible for these things. They set these things up, and God had a specific order for how everything had to be done, including the holy things that went into the holy place, and the ark, which went into the most holy place. And something happened during Saul's administration, and since the times when everything was set up properly, where stuff wasn't being done the right way. And the thing is, David is God's choice for king. And God is coming to be Israel's God. He has to make sure that this thing, that they remember how to do this thing the way he had taught them to do this thing from the beginning. So right from the beginning, he has to deal with the first set of instructions that he gave Moses to tell them from back in the day. Y'all can't just be touching this ark and doing your own thing. Okay? If they hadn't put the ark on the cart, they wouldn't have been in a situation where the donkey stumbled, the oxen stumbled, so that Uzzah would have felt like it was okay to handle the ark like it was just a regular box that you can just touch and make sure that it doesn't fall down. That reverence that God had told them back in the day, and just any old Joe Schmo can't touch the ark like that. The sons of Kohath are supposed to handle the ark, and they're supposed to carry it on their shoulders. Okay, I don't know if God was with them in a supernatural way so that they could bear the load so that they wouldn't stumble. I don't know why God wanted it done that way, but he wanted it done that way. But Uzzah and them, they started to do stuff the way other people did with their, handling the ark like it was an idol. And God had to set that thing straight right from the beginning. But David doesn't see it that way. David's confused. Okay. Well, he did it for the right reasons though, God. Uzzah was honoring you, God. He didn't want the ark to fall on the floor. That's why he reached out and touched the ark. I don't understand why you struck him down in this situation. And it's almost like David started feeling like, wow, if we have to follow all these rules and there's no mercy if somebody stumbles like this, I don't know if I could handle this. I don't know if I could do this right. I don't know if I could bring this ark into Jerusalem. It causes death. I don't want that death with me in Jerusalem. And he begins to have a wrong understanding of God, a wrong understanding of God's holiness, a wrong understanding of God's mercy, and it causes him to be angry with God. Okay? And every time we're angry with God, it's a situation like that. It's because we're believing a lie, and it's because we have a wrong understanding about the situation, about what God is really like, about what his purposes are for that. Okay? So let's continue to read what happens. So he was angry. So verse 13 says, so David would not move the ark with him into the city of David, but took it aside into the house of Obed-Edom the Gittite. The ark of God remained with the family of Obed-Edom in his house 3 months. And the Lord blessed the house of Obed-Edom and all that he had. Okay. And then it says, now Hiram, king of Tyre, sent messengers to David, and cedar trees, and masons, and carpenters, to build him a house. So David knew that the Lord had established him as king over Israel, for his kingdom was highly exalted for the sake of his people Israel. Verse 3. Then David took more wives in Jerusalem, and David begot more sons, and we read about that before. So you see how it's being told in a different order. Okay, and then it talks about the battle with the Philistines in this Chronicles account. Okay, so over a period of 3 months, David is watching. Wait a minute, the ark is in these people's houses, but they're blessed. So, all right, so I have a wrong understanding of this. This is how God deals with David. David is angry and disillusioned and fearful. And so God demonstrates when the ark is at the house of Obed-Edom that the ark, if you actually do what I'm asking you to do, the ark is really a blessing. It's not a curse. You don't have to fear having the ark with you. And David learns this lesson, but in this account, he still goes on to have his experience with the Philistines, with the Lord, and his victory with the Philistines, and he knows that the Lord is with him and everything. And after he defeats the Philistines, it says, verse 17, then the fame of David went out into all lands, and the Lord brought fear of him upon all the nations. So Chapter 15, First Chronicles chapter 15 says, David built houses for himself in the city of David, and he prepared a place for the ark of God and pitched a tent for it. Then David said, no one may carry the ark of God but the Levites. So somewhere along the process of David being angry with God and disillusioned that God struck him because of Uzzah, David gains understanding about why this even happened so that he can make peace with all the questions he had about this. You know, is this God so harsh and such a taskmaster? How in the world am I going to please him? But he learns why that happened with Uzzah. It says, then David says, no one may carry the ark of God but the Levites, for the Lord has chosen them to carry the ark of God and to minister before him forever. Verse 3, and David gathered all Israel together in Jerusalem to bring up the ark of God to its place which he had prepared for it. Verse 4, then David assembled the children of Aaron and the Levites of the sons of Kohath. These are the people that are supposed to carry the ark. Uriel the chief and 120 of his brethren of the sons of Merari. Asaiah the chief and 220 of his brethren of the sons of Gershom. These are the folks that handled the tabernacle. Joel the chief and 130 of his brethren of the sons of Elizaphan. Shemaiah the chief, and 200 of his brethren of the sons of Hebron, Eliel the chief, and 80 of his brethren of the sons of Uzziel, Aminadab the chief, and 112 of his brethren. And David called for Zadok and Abiathar the priests, and for the Levites, for Uriel, Asaiah, Joel, Shemaiah, Eliel, and Aminadab. He said to them, you are the heads of the fathers' houses of the Levites. Sanctify yourselves, you and your brethren, that you may bring up the ark of the Lord of Israel to the place I have prepared for it. For because you did not do it the first time, the Lord our God broke out against us because we did not consult him about the proper order. This is the issue at hand. Good intentions are not good enough, guys. There is a proper order. And in the New Testament, it tells us God is a spirit, and they that worship him must worship him in spirit and in truth. Okay, so we don't have this stuff like back in the Old Testament where the sons of Kohath had to carry the ark on a pole and all of this and this and that and all of that stuff. Okay, what we have though, that was a type and a shadow. What we have today is the fact that we have to know who God is and what we're dealing with. God is a spirit, okay? And the only successful way we're going to be able to worship him is in spirit. And I talked about that yesterday in the live about, being sin conscious and trying to clean up your flesh in your own strength and make your flesh act right. When in actuality, your flesh is supposed to be dead in Christ. You know what I'm saying? And you're supposed to follow God after the spirit. Okay? He's a spirit. So you have to worship him in spirit. Okay? And in truth. So there is a truth. And I think that's hard for us culturally today. Because today, every man is doing what is right in his own eyes. And there's this battle to make that so. You can't challenge somebody who's doing what's right in his own eyes. That's intolerant. Okay? So we're supposed to allow every man to do what's right in his own eyes. So what we have today is there's his truth and her truth and his truth and her truth and his truth. And that makes perfect sense, you guys, because without God, what makes your truth better than my truth? Okay? There can only be the truth when there is God, okay? Because the Bible says God is the truth, okay? The Holy Spirit that he's given a believer, to the Spirit of God that dwells in us, Holy Spirit, is also known as the Spirit of truth, okay? So God is truth, okay? So when you worship him, You have to know he's a spirit. You have to worship him in spirit, and you have to worship him in truth. Okay? You have to worship him according to what he laid out as the truth, because he is the truth. Okay? So that makes it impossible for you to be able to worship him. Well, I have my experience with God, and my faith. I'm walking out my faith. Okay? You need to be walking. There is the faith. You understand what I'm saying? I know what people are trying to say when they're saying my faith, okay? But I think the danger that we have is that we can believe that it's all subject to your interpretation, and whatever feels right for you, whatever you think is right, as long as you think is right, it's okay. Okay? But that's not what the Bible is saying. The Bible is saying that God has set this thing in order, and that there is an actual order. There is an actual way he wants to be worshiped, and he doesn't accept worship in other ways. Okay? Which is why he didn't accept for Uzzah to do what he did, and for the sons of Abiathar to handle the situation the way they did. He didn't accept that the house of Levi didn't, the Levitical priesthood, they didn't look at the situation and think, wait a minute, David, that's not the way it's done. Moses told us back in the day how this thing should be done. It's good that we want to worship God. It's good that we want to move the ark to Jerusalem. Nothing wrong with that. But there's a way it needs to be done. Okay? God's not going to let it slide because of our good intentions. Okay? And God had to get that right from the start. David, you're about to establish a kingdom, where I'm God. This thing is going to happen my way. I am a spirit. And if you want to worship me, you have to worship me in spirit and in truth. Okay? That's the New Testament application to what's happening here in the Old Testament. Okay? So let's see what so through this process, he was angry with God. He was disillusioned, even afraid to have God close to him, because wow, you're hardcore like that. If you're hardcore like that, how am I going to stand? How am I going to handle this thing? Better for me to put that thing over there. And God's like, okay, David, let's work through this. God didn't reject David because he was angry. It doesn't say that God wouldn't speak to David when he was in a situation with the Philistines, because he sent the ark to the house of these people, Obed Edom. It doesn't say that God he sent the ark to Obed Edom. So when he was dealing with the situation with the Philistines and he inquired of the Lord was angry because he didn't bring the ark to Jerusalem. So David was on his own with the Philistines. It didn't go down like that. It didn't go down like that. The Lord moved mightily for him. And David knew to inquire of the Lord, despite the fact that there were some things he didn't understand that he was working through about what happened with Uzzah. Who knows? Maybe he felt responsible. Oh man, I asked him to bring this ark, and Uzzah, look what happened to Uzzah. Did you have to do that, God? Couldn't you see our good intentions? And another thing came to my mind, and I've heard this preached before, but I was thinking more so, in our earthly relationships, the more we get to know somebody, the more intimate we become with our friends, with our family, with our spouses, there could be the potential for us to become so familiar with them that we can sort of kind of cross the line respect wise. I feel like in our culture we value everybody being on the same level. In some cultures age is a thing. There's a certain level of respect, there's a certain line you won't cross because somebody's older than you. It doesn't mean you love them any less, or that you're any closer to them. But you just realize and acknowledge, you have a reverence for their position, and for the authority that they have over your life, and it matters. But I know that in this culture, we've broken down a lot of those things. Right now, a little 5-year-old can come up to me and just start talking to me and addressing me by my first name. And if I have a problem with that, everybody's looking at me like, what's wrong with you? You know, we want to make ourselves accessible and let the child feel like the child could come close to us. And so we'll, so let them call you by your first name. But I didn't grow up like that. There were so many adults in my life that I felt very close to, felt very loved by, very protected by. But if their first name ever came out of my mouth, a miss or a mister, an aunt or an uncle, or some title of respect was attached to that name. And what that did for me was that it prevented the familiarity that comes when we're treating everybody like we're on the same level, when we're really not always on the same level. Okay, you can have that love and that intimacy, but acknowledge that that person is older, and I honor and respect the experience that they bring. And I noticed that, not saying you can't receive if you start calling an adult by their first name or an older person by their first name. I'm not saying that, but I noticed back in the day that order of authority and that respect and that reverence made it so I would be more likely to listen, be willing to listen, and think that what they're offering is of some value because of the experience that's behind them. And I feel like that's missing. Okay? So in this situation, I feel like God, with God, he wants this intimate relationship that's like a marriage, that's like a parent-child relationship, but without all the stuff that we've done when it comes to respect, reverence, authority. You know, you can't lose that fear of God, that reverence of God. You know what I'm saying? Because you're close to him, because you're familiar. You have to know that he is God. You can't lose that. Okay? Because it's a similar relationship to those things that are described, the marriage and the parent family relationship, sibling relationship, whatever. But it's different because we worship this God. And if you get too familiar, it interferes with the worship. You understand? And worship sometimes can become for you instead of for the God you're worshiping. I'm worshiping because it makes me feel good. I'm worshiping because he's going to bless me if I worship. I'm worshiping because it's fun. I'm worshiping, you know what I'm like, all these things, but that's not what worship is. Worship is something you're offering to the thing the being, the entity that you're worshiping. It's not for you, it's for them. And the blessing that you receive is a response. It's because you're in a back and forth relationship. But your reason for doing it shouldn't be that, if that makes any sense. So the familiar, we want to, it's interesting. Like the intimacy is there, but the lack of reverence shouldn't be there because of familiarity, if that makes any sense. And a good example I can give of this is, I foster a very close relationship with my kids. You know, we have a lot of structure and order in our house. They know what I expect of them. There are consequences that we work really hard to enforce if they don't do what they're supposed to do. But when it's time to have fun, we get down with them. We get silly with them. We let them get close to us, and our kids could feel, they start to feel so close to us and so comfortable with us. And there have been situations where, we're hanging out, we're watching a movie, or we're shopping, or we're doing whatever we're doing. And my girls and my son, they feel so close. Like I've had one of my daughters, say, hey sis, calling me sis. hey sis, and I turned, the first time she did it, it happens multiple times. You know what I'm saying? The first time she did it, I turned to her, I was like, I am not your sis. I'm your mom. You know what I'm saying? I'm not sis. We're not on the same level like that. And I wasn't mad, But it really illustrated, like, you get so comfortable that you know you can have all of that intimacy without crossing that line, without violating that boundary, because that boundary is there for your good. You know, I can't have my little 10-year-old thinking I'm sis. I'm not sis. Because when sis tells you to get up and go do what you're supposed to do, you're gonna do it because I'm mom. You know what I'm saying? When sis tells you that's dangerous, I don't want you to do that. You need to realize that sis knows more than you. Sis is mom. You know what I'm saying? And you need to listen to sis. Because I said so has value. And we've lost that. I mean, I've seen moms with their little toddlers, and they're negotiating with a toddler. Sit your butt down. You know what I'm saying? And I know what's better for you. I know what's better for you. You don't even know what you really need. You know, you're a toddler. And there's nothing wrong with that. I'm not violating your toddler rights because we didn't have a debate about it. You know what I'm saying? And it's upside down and backwards. And I believe that's why you have parents who don't have control of their households. And you have kids trying to find themselves, out here trying to find themselves. You ain't never going to find yourself. Because you're found in the Lord. You know, and if your parents are doing what they need to be doing, they're providing a safe environment for you by being in authority over your life. You need that authority. And if they love you, they will hear you. But you need to understand the order. There's nothing wrong with order if it's done in the Lord. And more importantly, there are consequences for breaking order. You know, God had to let that happen to Uzzah so that Israel would understand that they can't continue in this way. Okay? A lot of times in modern culture today, we want the thing to change, but we don't want to enforce any consequences. Okay? And when you don't enforce consequences, that's why your kids are not doing what you told them to do. They know all you're going to do is yell and be upset, but at the end of the day, nothing's going to happen to them. And kids learn really quickly how to tune all of that stuff out. And so they're going to continue doing what they want to do until you enforce what needs to happen. And that's true love. That's true love. When you don't want to follow through and be consistent with enforcing the things that you've set in place, that's called lazy parenting. Or a lack of parenting. And the consequences are these disrespectful, out of control kids. And I can speak to that because I worked as a teacher out there with other people's kids. It's bad. It's bad. And this is not to condemn anybody. This is not to condemn anybody, guys. But the way we're doing things right now, with every man doing what's right in his own eyes, how's it working for us? It's not working very well. Okay? And so David set things back in order. In verse 14, it says, you did not consult God about the proper order. Verse 13. Verse 14, so the priests and the Levites sanctified themselves to bring up the ark of Israel. And the children of the Levites bore the ark of God on their shoulders by its poles, as Moses had commanded according to the word of the Lord. And then David spoke to the leaders of the Levites to appoint their brethren to be the singers, accompanied by instruments and music. So there's this big, procession with music and worship, and it's all done with excellence. Okay, so verse 25 says, so when everything was ready, it says, so David, the elders of Israel, and the captains over thousands went to bring the ark of the covenant of the Lord from the house of Obed-Edom with joy. Now that they're doing it the right way, they can move forward with joy. Verse 26, and so it was when God helped the Levites, who bore the ark of the covenant of the Lord, that they offered 7 bulls and 7 rams. It says, David was clothed with a robe of fine linen, as were all the Levites who bore the ark, the singers, and Shaniah, the music masters with the singers. David also wore a linen ephod. Thus, so he chose to wear, he, instead of his royal robes, he chose to dress just like all these other people because he saw himself as a servant of the Lord on the same level as all of these other people as it pertains to bringing in the ark of God. And to me, it's a picture of him recognizing God is the true king. God is the true king. The ark represents bringing God in. And David recognizes that as king, God is working through him. Okay? It's a place of humility. Verse 28. Thus all Israel brought up the ark of the covenant of the Lord with shouting and with the sound of horns, with trumpets and with cymbals, making music with stringed instruments and harps. And it happened as the ark of the covenant of the Lord came to the city of David, that Michal, Saul's daughter, looked through a window and saw King David whirling and playing music. And in the second Samuel accounts, it says that David was leaping and jumping and carrying on. What do you guys think of that? This is David's version of worshiping God. There's music, there's shouting, there's dancing, there's all these loud instruments. He's jumping up and down and carrying on like he's at a football game. How does that compare to the stuff some of us do? And you know, I feel like a lot of our responses when we do see people acting that way about worshiping God, I feel like a lot of times people respond just like Michal. She was looking at him like, what in the world? Where are your robes at? Where are your royal robes, and why are you acting like this? You're acting like a commoner. You're acting like the son of Jesse, like how her father used to always disdain David and call him the son of Jesse, as if that was like the lowest name he could call him, even though he was the son-in-law of the king, because Michal was the king's daughter given to David. You know what I'm saying? And she has that. She comes to him with that same attitude. And when you read in the account in 2 Samuel, it says that, you know, you see that David blessed the Lord by bringing the ark in that way. And then it talks about how he blessed his people by giving them bread and raisins and cakes and all this stuff. And then he was ready to, you know, in that same spirit to go in to bless his household. And Michal says to him, you made a spectacle of yourself today. How could the king do what you did? And I love how David answered her. And I think the way he answered her, let me see. She despised him in the ark. I think the way he answered her is in 2 Samuel. Because he does confront her. Let me see 2 Samuel 6. Yeah, it's in 2 Samuel 6, verse 21. It says, so David said to Michal, it was before the Lord. I did this because I was worshiping before the Lord. You know, my husband is a very expressive worshiper like this, and people always react to that because it seems so out of place. And if you knew him in real life, he's expressive like that because of the Lord when he wants to worship God, you know. But it shouldn't be strange like that. It really shouldn't be strange like that. Okay, it says, it was before the Lord who chose me instead of your father and all his house to appoint me ruler over the people of the Lord, over Israel. It says, therefore, I will play music before the Lord, and I will be even more undignified than this, and will be humble in my own sight. Just because I'm king? We're dealing with God. It's the least I could do. I need to know he's God. Whether I'm king or not, I will worship him with everything that I have. It's as it should be. And if only all the kings of Israel responded that way, you guys, they would have never gone into captivity the way they did. When God is blessing you, and it's when God came up behind David and blessed his kingdom, he was so blessed, it would have been so easy for him to forget God. I believe this position, this heart of worship that he had saved him when so many of the other kings fell in the pride of what they had. People like Solomon. Okay? But as for the maidservants of whom you have spoken, by them I will be held in honor. Because she says something like, you know, you uncovering yourself. How, it's, what Michael had said to David was, how glorious was the king of Israel today, uncovering himself today in the eyes of the maids of his servants, as one of the base fellows shamelessly uncovers himself. You know, David said, well, but as for the maidservants of whom you have spoken, by them I will be held in honor. He's like, no, nobody's going to dishonor me for this. It's an honorable thing that I did, Michael, and you should have recognized it. You know, and this is a bad situation for Michael, who had been so loyal to David when she first married him, that she defied her father and let him out of the window of their home so that Saul and them couldn't kill David. She sunk from that. I mean, she went through a lot, because while David was gone, hiding from Saul and everything like that, Saul took her and gave her to somebody else, a man who loved her. But could you imagine being passed from man to man to get back at David? Saul did that, you know. And then when David became king, David was like, give me my wife back. Michael is my wife, you know. She's my wife. I didn't divorce her. You took her from me. Satan, you giving me everything back that was mine. And then there's that whole sad story about how Abner goes and gets Michael to make that happen, and her husband follows behind crying, don't take my wife, don't take my wife. It doesn't say how Michael felt in the middle of all of this, but clearly she was affected, because this is a very different Michael that's dealing with David right now. And her attitude is to her detriment, because dude was coming in to bless his household. And she came at him with that attitude. And what ends up happening, it says, verse 23, therefore Michael, the daughter of Saul, had no children to the day of her death. And, you know, at times I read that to say that she became barren, but I think a better way to look at it is probably that after she had that attitude, I mean, he has so many wives at this point. I think David was just done with her. Nobody else could have her. She's the king's wife. No one else could have her. And if David didn't want her, she wasn't going to be able to have kids after that, because there was going to be no one to give her kids. And so I think in that sense, she didn't have kids until she died. You know, that's what I'm thinking. It doesn't say God struck her with barrenness, because that would have been a punishment to David. So I think she just never had kids, because that was it. He never came. He didn't come to her like that again. Okay. And so this is how God walked David through his anger and gave him right understanding about what happened with Uzzah and why God reacted that way, and right understanding about God's presence and what it brings. God's presence brings blessing, but there are consequences to being out of order, out of God's order, okay? Not man's order. Because we like to put a lot of order and a lot of rules and a lot of restrictions and in the name of God, okay? But God moved that way because his order was broken. We need to understand what God's order is, okay? And we need not to profane his name and make him common. While we're intimate and loving and close to God, we can't ever forget that he is God. And he's glorious. He's glorious. He's glorious, and he deserves our glorious worship. Okay? And in First Chronicles chapter 16, David basically does a song of thanksgiving, a psalm of thanksgiving to that effect. Everything that he's learned through this process. Oh, give thanks to the Lord, verse 8, 16 and 8. Call upon his name. Make known his deeds among the people. Sing to him. Sing psalms to him. Talk of his wondrous works. Glory in his holy name. Let the hearts of those rejoice who seek the Lord. Seek the Lord and his strength. Seek his face forevermore. Remember his marvelous works which he has done, his wonders and the judgments of his mouth. O seed of Israel, his servants, you children of Jacob, his chosen ones. He is the Lord our God. His judgments are in all the earth. Remember his covenant forever, the word which he commanded for 1,000 generations, the covenant which he made with Abraham and his oath to Isaac, and confirmed it to Jacob for a statute, to Israel for an everlasting covenant, saying, to you I will give the land of Canaan as the allotment of your inheritance, etc., 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 about their history. But know who God is. Get as close to him as you can get. But don't forget that he is God. And we're this thing is about worshiping him. But he doesn't back up from your anger. And what I saw in this story is that can happen. Okay, but don't harden your heart and be bitter and be like, if that's how God is, well, okay, I don't want that God. I don't want that God. I don't want him anyway. I'd rather roast in hell. People have that attitude. Are you out of your mind? But people have that attitude. Don't have that attitude. There are things we may not understand. There are things that might happen to us and questions that we might have and things that might disturb us deeply and hurt us and even move us to anger. But we must allow God to take us through a process to bring truth and right thinking and understanding in that. And we need to be like David, to continue to walk with God in that, and to ask him and to allow him to reveal to us what it all means, what we need to do, what happened, how we can avoid this in the future, or whatever it is as it applies to your situation. God's not afraid or disgusted or turned off by those feelings from us, but we need to bring them to him, not just go off and do your own thing. Please. All right, you guys. So that's all I have for you guys today. Nobody said anything to me in the chat, and I have to go. So I hope you guys have a blessed day. Don't get dizzy.